On March 30th, 2026, a handful of physicists sat staring at a paper on their screens. And one of them, without exaggeration, said out loud that this changes everything we thought we knew about how much time we have left. That is not marketing language. That is not a headline written to grab clicks. That is a direct reaction from inside the quantum computing community itself. The moment two competing research teams, Google and a small Caltech spinout called Oratomic, independently discovered that breaking the encryption protecting the entire internet might require a fraction of the resources anyone believed possible just 12 months earlier. If you use a bank, if you own cryptocurrency, if you send a single encrypted message on your phone, what these scientists just did concerns you directly. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why some of the smartest people on the planet are suddenly in a hurry. Let's rewind slightly, because to understand why this moment terrified researchers, you need to understand the number everyone had agreed on for years. For most of the last 2 decades, the consensus among cryptographers was that breaking modern public key encryption, the elliptic curve cryptography protecting Bitcoin, Ethereum, online banking, and most secure web traffic would require somewhere around 1 million physical qubits running an error-corrected quantum computer for an extended period of time. That number felt safe. It felt distant. It gave governments, banks, and technology companies decades to prepare a calm, orderly transition to new quantum-resistant encryption standards. Then, within the span of a single week in March 2026, that comfortable number collapsed. Not by a small margin, but by nearly 2 orders of magnitude. If numbers like this genuinely fascinate you, make sure you like this video right now, because what happened next is where the story gets even stranger. Google Quantum AI, working alongside researchers from the Ethereum Foundation and Stanford University, released a 57-page white paper claiming that breaking 256-bit elliptic curve cryptography, the exact standard securing Bitcoin and Ethereum wallets, could require fewer than 500,000 physical qubits, a reduction of nearly 20 times compared to the field's previous best estimate. On the very same day, in what researchers describe as a stunning coincidence, or perhaps not a coincidence at all, Oratomic published a separate independent resource estimate suggesting the same encryption could be broken using a neutral atom quantum computer with roughly 26,000 qubits in about 10 days. For a different but equally critical standard, RSA 2048, the kind of encryption financial institutions rely on to secure web platforms. Oratomic estimated around 100,000 qubits and roughly 3 months of runtime. To put that in perspective, the amount of quantum computing power theoretically required to break the internet's encryption has now fallen by 5 full orders of magnitude in 20 years, according to researchers tracking these estimates since Peter Shor first published his factoring algorithm back in 1994. Here is the detail that actually made cybersecurity professionals lose sleep, and it has nothing to do with the qubit numbers themselves. Bas Westerban, a cybersecurity researcher at Cloudflare, one of the companies quietly securing a massive portion of global internet traffic, told reporters bluntly that this was a real shock, and that his team would need to speed up their preparations considerably. Within days, Cloudflare publicly announced it was moving its own post. Quantum migration deadline forward, from a comfortable distant target to 2029, just a few short years away. Google did the exact same thing internally, shifting its own migration deadline to that same year, 2029, a number that carries enormous weight precisely because Google's own researchers are the ones producing the estimates driving the fear in the first place. When the company building the threat also races to defend against it, that tells you something important about how seriously insiders are taking this moment. Now here is where the story becomes genuinely unsettling in a completely different way. Dolev Blufstein, one of the physicists behind the Oratomic paper, admitted something remarkable to reporters, that artificial intelligence played an instrumental role in accelerating the discovery. Before founding Oratomic, one of the paper's co-authors, a former Google quantum AI researcher, told a colleague still working inside Google's quantum division that he had been using AI systems and, in his own words, quote, seeing lots of crazy results. Just weeks later, Google quietly posted a job listing for a quantum researcher specifically tasked with developing AI-powered discovery pipelines. Then, in a move that stunned observers, watching the timeline closely, Google announced its own internal atomic quantum computing initiative on a Tuesday, less than a week before both the Google and Oratomic papers were published almost simultaneously. Blufstein did not hesitate when asked directly whether artificial intelligence helped produce these results. There's no question, he said, that we used AI to accelerate this development, no question at all. Think about what that actually means. Artificial intelligence did not just help write an essay or generate an image this time. It may have directly shortened the runway humanity has to protect its own financial and communication infrastructure from being cracked wide open. If this kind of collision between artificial intelligence and quantum physics is exactly the sort of story you want more of, don't forget to subscribe, because these two fields are now accelerating each other in ways almost nobody predicted even a year ago. It's worth pausing here to be precise about what these papers do and do not prove, because exaggeration helps no one and accuracy matters enormously on a topic this serious. Neither paper has completed peer review. Jeff Thompson, an associate professor at Princeton and a quantum computing company chief executive, pointed out publicly that many of the underlying assumptions in these estimates remain, in his words, untested. Google's paper did not even reveal its actual improved algorithm, choosing instead to publish what is called a zero-knowledge proof, essentially a mathematical demonstration that they possess a working method without disclosing the method itself, a decision that itself raised eyebrows across the research community. And critically, today's quantum computers remain far too small and far too error-prone to actually execute any of these theoretical attacks right now. A 2025 survey of experts in the field estimated only a 39% chance that quantum computers capable of genuinely threatening encryption would exist within the next decade at all. But here is why scientists are not simply shrugging this off as harmless theory. This is now the third major paper in roughly 3 months to independently arrive at drastically lower resource estimates, following earlier work from researchers at Iceberg Quantum in Sydney and additional analysis from QCTRL, all converging on the same unsettling direction. The threshold keeps falling, and it keeps falling faster than almost anyone predicted. Multiple quantum computing experts told Time magazine that, together, the Oratomic and Google results could significantly shorten the development timeline for what cryptographers call a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, essentially a machine powerful enough to genuinely break the encryption protecting your bank account, your medical records, and your private communications. Blufstein himself put it in strikingly human terms, saying that people inside the field, upon seeing these results, react with a mixture of shock and inevitability, essentially concluding that there is no way humanity is going to stop this progress now that it has this much momentum behind it. This threat carries a particularly sinister dimension that most people outside cybersecurity circles have never even considered, something researchers call harvest now, decrypt later. Intelligence agencies and sophisticated attackers do not need a working quantum computer today to benefit from one in the future. They simply need to intercept and store encrypted data. Right now, banking records, private messages, government communications, intellectual property, and simply wait. The moment a sufficiently powerful quantum computer becomes operational, years of previously unbreakable encrypted traffic could be unlocked all at once, retroactively exposing secrets that everyone assumed were permanently protected. This is precisely why the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the United States finalized new post-quantum cryptography standards back in 2024, and why organizations across finance, healthcare, and government are now scrambling to migrate their systems years ahead of when quantum computers are actually expected to pose a genuine practical threat. The window between now and that eventual Q day, as researchers have started calling it, is exactly when the harvested data becomes valuable, meaning the danger is already unfolding quietly in the background, even while today's quantum machines remain too weak to do anything themselves. The scale of this shift becomes even clearer when you compare it against everything else happening in the quantum computing world throughout 2025 and 2026. Google's Willow chip achieved a genuine milestone in December 2024, becoming the first quantum processor to demonstrate that adding more qubits could actually reduce errors instead of compounding them, flipping decades of conventional wisdom upside down. Microsoft followed with its Majorana 1 processor, built around entirely different topological qubits, theoretically scalable to 1 million qubits on a single chip, though outside scientists have since raised serious questions about the experimental evidence supporting some of those underlying claims. Caltech built a record-breaking array of over 6,000 neutral atom qubits. Researchers in Germany fully simulated a 50-qubit universal quantum computer using Europe's new exascale supercomputer. Each of these individual breakthroughs might sound modest in isolation, but stacked together across just 18 months, they paint a picture of a field moving dramatically faster than the calm our gradual timeline governments and businesses had spent years planning around. So what happens now? Governments worldwide are accelerating quantum-safe initiatives with real, enforceable deadlines rather than distant aspirational goals. The G7's Cyber Expert Group has set 2035 as a reference target for full migration across the financial sector, while recommending that the most critical systems complete the transition years earlier between 2030 and 2032. The United Kingdom's National Cybersecurity Center has laid out an even more detailed staged timeline, with checkpoints in 2028, 2031, and 2035. Meanwhile, Cryptocurrency exchanges and blockchain foundations are quietly beginning conversations about migration paths that seemed almost unthinkably premature just 2 years ago. None of this means panic is warranted. Today's quantum computers genuinely cannot break your encryption, full stop. But it does mean the calm, comfortable decades-long runway that governments and corporations were counting on has visibly, measurably shortened. Not because the hardware suddenly leapt forward overnight, but because a handful of brilliant, occasionally AI-assisted physicists just proved that the mathematical mountain standing between today's machines and tomorrow's threat is dramatically smaller than anyone had calculated. Let's talk about what actually happened inside the cryptocurrency markets the moment this news broke, because the reaction tells you just how seriously professional investors took it. Bitcoin was trading above $60,000 when the papers dropped, and while the price did not collapse overnight. The news article covering the story specifically noted the live price alongside the technical findings, because for the first time in years, a purely academic quantum computing paper was being treated as market-moving information, rather than a distant theoretical curiosity. Blockchain security researchers scrambled within hours to publish their own counter-analyses, some arguing the oratomic estimates carried undisclosed conflicts of interest, since several authors have a direct financial stake in quantum computing hardware, succeeding commercially, a detail that matters enormously when you're trying to separate genuine scientific urgency from a company, incentivized to make quantum threats sound as close and dramatic as possible. That skepticism is worth sitting with for a moment, because good science demands it. One widely read technical breakdown, examining Google's own white paper in detail, argued that popular coverage describing Bitcoin as crackable in 9 minutes badly misrepresented what the paper actually claimed, conflating a theoretical resource estimate with an imminent practical attack capability. The authors of that breakdown pointed out that even under Google's own most aggressive assumptions, the described attack would still require hundreds of thousands of physical qubits operating with extraordinarily low error rates, conditions that remain years away from any existing hardware platform. This is precisely the tension defining the entire field right now. Genuine, alarming mathematical progress on paper, colliding with the stubborn, grinding physical reality of building machines that can actually execute these theoretical attacks without collapsing under their own quantum noise. And that physical reality is genuinely brutal, which is part of why so many veteran physicists remain cautious even as headlines scream about looming danger. Quantum error correction works by grouping many fragile physical qubits together into a single, more stable logical qubit. And for that process to function reliably, each logical qubit typically requires somewhere between 100 and 1,000 physical qubits supporting it. To run any genuinely useful application of Shor's algorithm against real-world encryption, a quantum computer needs thousands of these logical qubits working in concert, meaning today's machines, which still operate in the range of a few hundred physical qubits total, remain, many technological generations, away from posing an actual operational threat. Yet even acknowledging that gap, researchers at the Niels Bohr Institute in Copenhagen recently built a real-time monitoring system capable of tracking qubit performance fluctuations roughly 100 times faster than any previous method, revealing that even seemingly stable qubits can silently degrade from good to bad within mere milliseconds. That kind of granular insight into qubit behavior is exactly the sort of incremental engineering progress that, layered year after year, eventually closes gaps that once looked mathematically impossible to close. There's also a fascinating materials science angle to this story that rarely gets attention outside specialist journals, but genuinely matters for the long-term trajectory of the entire field. In February 2026, researchers at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology announced they may have identified signs of a long-sought triplet superconductor, a material capable of transmitting both electricity and electron spin simultaneously with zero resistance. If verified through further experimentation, a material like this could dramatically stabilize quantum computers while slashing their energy consumption, potentially solving one of the field's most persistent engineering headaches, keeping fragile quantum states coherent long enough to perform useful calculations. Professor Jacob Linder, who led the research, described a triplet superconductor as high on the wish list of physicists working in solid-state physics for decades, precisely because today's quantum computers require enormous, expensive cooling infrastructure just to keep their qubits stable for fractions of a second. Meanwhile, not every recent quantum headline points toward accelerating danger, and it is worth highlighting the counterexamples, because a complete picture requires nuance rather than pure alarm. In May 2026, physicists at the Simons Foundation's Flatiron Institute, working alongside collaborators at Boston University, actually overturned an earlier, widely publicized quantum supremacy claim, using nothing more exotic than clever mathematical compression techniques called tensor networks executed in part on an ordinary laptop computer. Their technique effectively squeezed extra problem-solving power out of classical computers, proving that a calculation once claimed to be solvable only by quantum hardware could, in fact, be replicated using conventional computing and sufficiently creative code. Around the same period, a separate team led by physics professor Sergei Frolov at the University of Pittsburgh published a major paper in Science after a grueling 2-year peer review process, revealing that several previously celebrated topological quantum computing milestones, dramatic experimental signals, once hailed as smoking gun evidence of breakthrough progress, could actually be explained through far more mundane conventional physics, once researchers examined more complete datasets. These findings matter enormously for anyone trying to separate genuine progress from hype, because they reveal a field where excitement sometimes outruns rigor, and where today's celebrated headline can become tomorrow's cautionary tale about scientific overreach. All of this context is exactly why the reaction to the March 2026 encryption papers carries so much weight, because it did not come from breathless tech journalism alone. It came from hardened skeptics inside the cryptography and quantum physics communities who have watched previous breakthrough claims get walked back before. When people like Bas Westerborn at Cloudflare, someone whose entire career revolves around securing global internet infrastructure and who has previously pushed back hard against exaggerated quantum doom narratives from cryptocurrency skeptics, publicly calls a result a real shock that carries far more weight than another optimistic press release from a startup chasing investment. Cloudflare's own public statement noted that 65% of their traffic already flows through post-quantum encrypted channels today, meaning this is not a company panicking from a standing start. It is a company that had already built substantial defenses and still felt compelled to accelerate its remaining timeline in direct response to these papers. Zoom out even further, and you start to see this moment as part of a much larger pattern reshaping the entire technology landscape in 2026, one where artificial intelligence is no longer just a tool sitting alongside scientific research. It is becoming an active participant inside the discovery process itself, a shift few researchers saw coming even 18 months ago. Industry predictions circulating throughout the quantum community earlier this year specifically flagged that recent breakthroughs in AI-based error correction and noise modeling would prove essential to quantum progress going forward, and the events of March 2026 validated that prediction faster and more dramatically than most experts expected. Quantum software engineering has effectively become its own first-class discipline almost overnight, with AI-native simulation and digital twin modeling emerging as baseline requirements for any serious quantum hardware or cloud computing player hoping to remain competitive. When a former Google researcher can leave to co-found a startup, apply AI tools to an unsolved cryptographic problem, and produce results that force Google itself to accelerate its own defensive timeline within the same month, that tells you the pace of change in this field has entered genuinely uncharted territory. And it explains precisely why the physicists closest to this research keep using words like shock, inevitability, and unprepared to describe what they are witnessing unfold in real time. It is also worth understanding why this particular convergence of artificial intelligence and quantum research feels different from previous incremental advances in the field. For most of quantum computing's history, progress crawled forward through painstaking, purely human trial and error, physicists testing one modification at a time, publishing incremental improvements measured in single-digit percentage gains. What Blufstein and his oratomic collaborators demonstrated is something categorically different, using artificial intelligence systems to explore an enormous combinatorial space of possible algorithmic improvements far faster than any human research team could manage manually, then verifying which of those AI-generated pathways actually produce genuine mathematical breakthroughs. The team, has stated it, plans to publish a dedicated follow-up paper specifically detailing how artificial intelligence contributed to their results, a level of transparency. The physics community is watching closely, since it could establish a template for how AI-assisted discovery reshapes entire scientific fields far beyond just quantum computing and cryptography. Scientists are not terrified because quantum computers can break the internet today. They cannot. Scientists are terrified because the gap between theory and reality just shrank faster in a single week than it had in the previous 2 decades combined. Because artificial intelligence appears to be accelerating that shrinkage in ways nobody can fully predict or control. Whether Q-Day arrives in 5 years or 15, the researchers racing to migrate the world's encryption before that day comes are no longer treating it as a distant, hypothetical problem. They are treating it as a countdown that just got noticeably shorter. The honest truth is that nobody, not Google, not Oratomic, not the cryptographers racing to build quantum-resistant defenses, can tell you with certainty exactly when this theoretical threat becomes an operational one, and that uncertainty itself is precisely what keeps serious scientists awake at night far more than any single headline number ever could. If this story left you thinking differently about the encryption protecting your own digital life, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell, because whatever quantum computers do next is going to happen faster than anyone expects.